This week on Africa Weekly, we commemorate the 5-year anniversary of Tunisia's revolution and look at the legacy of a revolt that toppled a dictator and triggered the Arab Spring. We take you on a rickety ride along Khartoum's sand-lined streets. And finally, we head to Algeria to catch up with their first ever national rugby team that's hoping to take the region by storm. But first, a summary of the stories that made the headlines this week. The World Health Organization announced the end of the 2-year Ebola outbreak that killed more than 11,000 people, with Liberia the last country to get the all clear. But then the following day, a new death from the disease was announced in Sierra Leone after a 22-year-old female student was taken ill. The organization had warned of possible flare-ups of the disease. Students trickled back on Monday for classes at Kenya's Garissa University, where at least 148 people were killed by Islamist gunmen 9 months ago. Security was tight, but only around 20 students resumed classes at the university, which had around 800 students before the massacre. The assault was the deadliest yet in Kenya by the Al-Qaeda-linked Shabab group, whose attacks have been ongoing, including the storming of an army base in Somalia this week that has left several dead. Hundreds of parents and sympathizers of the 200 schoolgirls abducted by Boko Haram Islamists in northeast Nigeria nearly 2 years ago marched through the capital Abuja to meet President Muhammadu Buhari and renew calls for their release. The demonstration was the first time the group has met Buhari since he declared in December that the extremists were technically defeated, despite warnings from security analysts that the war was far from over. Roch Marc Christian Kabore, Burkina Faso's new president, unveiled his new government lineup on Wednesday in a nation with a history of coups. Kabore kept the Defence and Veterans Affairs portfolio for himself, as had his predecessor Blaise Compaoré, who was overthrown by an uprising in 2014. Reform of the army is a key consideration in a country where the military has often played a disproportionate role in politics and whose history is peppered with coups and attempts to overthrow the government. Benin held its National Voodoo Day event, which draws crowds of devotees and tourists each year to see the voodoo leader and take part in the festivities. This week, Tunisia celebrated the 5-year anniversary of its 2011 revolt, which led to the toppling of Ben Ali. But despite a successful democratic transition, disillusionment amongst Tunisians is rife, and the country grapples with a growing jihadist threat.
Bullet scan. This was how Skandar Hamda was best known as a cyber dissident under the regime of Ben Ali. On January 6, 2011, he was arrested, then tortured in the jails of the Tunisian Interior Ministry. He was only 16 years old. 5 years after the revolution that eventually toppled Ben Ali, he says the reforms that have been put in place are not enough.
We can draw rather positive conclusions if we compare Tunisia today to Tunisia under Ben Ali 5 years ago. But if we compare Tunisia today to the Tunisia we dreamed about on the morning of January 15, 2011, after Ben Ali's departure, then what we see is pretty disappointing.
Tunisia is often cited as an example of a successful political transition after its revolt spread to more Arab states, bringing down other autocratic regimes. Its constitution, voted on in January 2014, proclaims several rights and freedoms. But for analyst Michael Ayari, the country remains overall very shaky.
The state must be strengthened as freedom is strengthened, instead of having the state get stronger at the expense of freedom. And this is a very serious thing, because when you put aside everything that's been said and the constitution that is yet to be developed in terms of law and civil code, etc., there's really not much there. And if the state at some point continues down this path, it will start thinking that to strengthen itself, it has to reduce freedom.
The anti-terrorism law adopted in July of last year includes the possibility of 2 weeks of jail time without access to a lawyer. One of the reasons why Nobel Peace Prize winner Abdesattar Ben Moussa is increasingly worried about the state of freedom in his country.
I think what we're afraid of is that under the pretext of fighting terrorism, freedom starts to be undermined. And there are, at the moment, certain practices that infringe on freedom.
In 2015, Tunisia was struck by 3 major terrorist attacks claimed by the Islamic State jihadist group, which took the lives of 72 people, including 59 tourists. Following the latest attack in November, a state of emergency was declared then extended until February. Tiger seats, tiger stickers, tiger paws. This rickshaw belongs to Baha El-Din Yassin, also known as the Tiger. He spent $200 to have it decorated.
It creates more opportunities to have more customers. If a customer goes on a ride with you, maybe he'll call you again. Drivers need to be given a second chance. The first time is an introduction, the second time is business.
In Sudan, competition is stiff for rickshaws, which are imported from India and also called tuk-tuks. Thousands of drivers battle it out for customers in Khartoum for a salary ranging from $10 to $30 a week. Aklilu is a regular Tiger customer. For this English teacher, picking a rickshaw is all about loyalty.
I like it because first I like the design, the Tiger design that he does, and the fact that he knows all the places that I want to go.
One of the best places in town to customize rickshaws is Tamouri's. Here, drivers can have the seats changed and all types of accessories built in. Most of them don't own their rickshaws, but still find investing in them to be worth their while.
The rickshaw is like a home for its driver. He has to decorate it to be in a good mood, even if it costs money. That makes him different from his other brothers who have rickshaws. And customers like fun rickshaws. They favor those with cassette players, accessories and good lighting because they're prettier and run faster. People in the streets always stop rickshaws that have these things.
4.6 million people live in bustling Khartoum. In a country where the unemployment rate exceeds 30%, rickshaws are a cheaper way to get around than taxis and buses, meaning drivers like the Tiger are unlikely to go out of business anytime soon. It's a familiar scene. Players on the field in Algeria's green and white singing the national anthem. But this is not a football game. This is the very first game of Algeria's brand new rugby team. More than half a century after the country's independence, the national team was made official on December 18th. For supporters watching from the stands, it's an important day.
I
think it's extraordinary for this new sport to be introduced in Algeria. Young Algerians are more interested in football than rugby, so I think we have to keep promoting rugby, along with other sports that are not well known in the country.
The team's first challenge was against Tunisia, ranked 38th in the world. Final score, 16-6 for the men in green and white. A proud moment for these players, many of whom grew up abroad.
All the players, whether they're in Europe or New Zealand, Australia, France or England, they wanted to come to play in Algeria. That was their priority.
The idea for an Algerian rugby team originated in 2007, when a group of French-Algerian players living in France set out to bring the sport back to their country of origin. A first club was founded in the coastal city of Oran shortly after, followed by a dozen others all over Algeria. 9 years later, the Algerian Rugby Federation was recognized worldwide and the national team officially created.
Our goal is to instill a culture and to go through schools. We have a program put in place with each school and each province by the International Rugby Federation, World Rugby and Africa Rugby, so we can start training sports managers. Today we want to establish rugby in Algeria step by step, so we can eventually, in 10 years from now, have our own rugby culture in the country.
The federation now hopes to start climbing up in the African rankings, currently topped by South Africa's unrivaled Springboks. With a more immediate goal in mind, have Algeria's green and white featured at the next Rugby World Cup in Japan in 2019.
Kenya has vowed to take action to protect its #1 brand ambassadors after World Anti-Doping Agency Inquiry Chief Richard Pound warned that it clearly had an athletics doping problem. Nairobi said it would not allow doping to tarnish its reputation, despite the suspension of more than 40 Kenyan athletes in the past 2 years. And Rwanda are this year's hosts of the African Nations Championship. The tournament, organised by the African Football Confederation, is held every 2 years and alternates with the higher-profile Africa Cup of Nations. Next week we go to the camps of Malawi, where Mozambican refugees are flooding in by the hundreds after their homes were torched in the government's hunt for supporters of an opposition leader. That's all from us at Africa Weekly. Until next week.